3 years ago, I spent my life savings on my dream boat, but little did I know she was basically compost. After a year at sea, I took her out of the water, and what started as a hairline crack in the stern has turned into a full rebuild of the transom, setting me off on an adventure of reschooling myself from a computer-based animator to a traditional shipwright. In the last episode, I got the first piece of wood in place, and in this episode, the work continues. More than 6 months had now passed since I hauled out. The worst of the cold weather was hopefully behind us by now, but the morning frost was still covering the grass. The bald eagles were starting to return from their communal winter roosting areas, and with them came the small songbirds. Spring was just around the corner. It hadn't been the easiest winter. While on land I didn't have to take storms into account in the same way, I still had some troubles. Even with the tarps, more rainwater leaks were emerging, and the wood was clearly taking damage. But I had finally got the first piece of fresh wood into the boat. It felt like a monumental achievement, if I ignored the fact that the rest of the boat probably needed the same kind of treatment. I was starting to get used to the life in the boatyard. While it wasn't what I dreamed of when I bought the boat, it was offering me some form of stability, access to a shower, an address, and a life where I didn't have to focus so much on the weather and storms to stay safe. But I would lie if I said that I didn't miss the water. I continued working in the boatyard on the North Star restoration. Fresh wood was going back into the boat, and I was paying close attention to the work, learning as much as I could during the workday, and working nights and evenings on my own boat.
The feeling of getting this first piece of wood back into the boat is just pure satisfaction, but can't rest too long on that. On to the next. And this one is in a bit of a worse state than the first.
With the first transom frame in place, it was just a matter of repeating the same thing a couple more times. While starting with a stern replacement on a boat like this might be one of the most complicated places to start, at least these pieces of wood were pretty straightforward. It was basically a glorified 2x4 made out of a really nice and hard wood. I didn't even have to make any patterns from these frames, I could just trace them straight onto the wood. At this point I was still fairly new with the tools, especially the big ones like the bandsaw and the table saw. I'd never really had a reason to use any tools like this since woodworking class in middle school. Most of my adult life I'd spent living in different apartments from cities like Stockholm, Boston, Turin and now Vancouver, and having access to a wood shop was just never on the radar. But I've never been afraid of learning new things. It's kinda where I thrive. And while I hadn't really done any big woodworking, I'd always had interest that involved working with my hands to some extent. The stakes working with these tools were a bit higher though. One wrong move and you could lose a finger or more. The worst work injury you would get as an animator would be carpal tunnel syndrome from holding a pen for too long, or a ruined back from hunching over a screen for years at the end. I was finding the work really satisfying. Not only the obvious part of getting the enjoyment of restoring something old, but the fact that I got to move my body as I was doing work was something new to me. For 10 years I'd been sitting still, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, often too tired at the end of the day to get up and do something, usually ending up on a couch in front of another screen.
Alright, let's see if this fits. Alright, number 2, and it's looking pretty good. On to the next. See if I can get it out.
With the second frame in place, it was time for the last of the short ones. Most of the timber in the stern was made with white oak, something that you often see in these old boats. It's revered in boat building for its steam bending properties and its rot resistance. Though seeing the state of my own boat and having seen multiple others, I'd have to question if the rot resistance is all that good. The black locust that I'm using for these frames is a funny wood. It's incredibly dense and rock solid, but when you steam it, it bends like a noodle. And not only that, but it glows a neon green under a black light. The bark, seeds and leaves are highly toxic to humans and animals, and the high silica content that grants the wood its protective qualities is also incredibly dangerous to humans. It can cause severe, incurable and fatal lung diseases. In the last video I got called out for wearing a full-face respirator in the workshop, and the commenter was implying that people that wear ear protection and respirators are weak, which I have to say myself I think is a ridiculous take. Personally, I don't measure bravery and toughness in the amount of fine dust particulate I can inhale, or how many loud noises I can endure before developing hearing damage. I intend to live a long and healthy life, so I'm going to keep wearing the necessary protective gear when doing this work. Okay, it looks like I can take a little bit more right here, just to get it to sit flush. Alright, let's try again. I mean, that's looking pretty damn good. Now let's see if we can get this piece off here. See if I can pry these out. These pieces were likely added there to transfer some of the force from the swim grid from the frames into the actual framing of the lazarette. Bit of an oddly ornate looking piece for something that is residing in the lazarette, and I mean, this here doesn't really add anything but a bunch of end grain for moisture to get in and pretty much to rot the wood. So I think I'm gonna do a much simpler, straight version of this. In the end I decided to not make the piece completely straight, but instead to give it a little bit of a curve. Maybe it's a work damage from being an animator, and having spent so much time of my life thinking about what a good line looks like. Straight pieces feel too rigid, too conforming, too stiff. Did I lose a fraction of strength in the wood by doing this? Maybe. But the way the grain curves, I'm not very worried about that. And the strength of the wood is a major upgrade from the white oak that was previously there. Alright, next on the list is this frame here, and it's fastened with 2 old rusty nails, so I'm gonna try to get in with this multi-tool here and see if I can saw them off. Learning to process raw wood into actual pieces that would go into a boat was quite a process to learn. Having spent most of my professional career in front of a computer screen, it wasn't necessarily obvious where to start. But thanks to the time I'd spent filming the crew as they worked away on the North Star, I'd picked up on what tools and what order to do things in. First, I needed to establish a straight edge, and that I did with a chalk line, snapping a perfectly straight line on top of the wood that I could then follow with a large circular saw. I then roughly cut my wood to length, saving any short offcuts to make wedges from. Since I wasn't able to cut 100% straight with the circular saw, I pushed the piece through a jointer to make sure that my edge was completely straight and flat. And for those of you who have never used a jointer before, it's basically a spinning blade with two surfaces, one higher than the other. And when you push a piece of wood along the lower edge, it shaves off a thin layer of wood, making your surface completely flat. With the slab now square, I could push it through the bandsaw and make it the width that I needed. I then finished my stock by sending it through the planer. The planer is basically a jointer but upside down, and I used that to finish the rough surfaces on the top and the bottom. With my rough stock now prepared, I could cut it to the right width that I needed for the frame. With each frame I made, I got faster and faster as I got more comfortable using the tools. For those of you with a keen eye and who knows how to pick good wood, you might have noticed that this frame stock had a few knots in it. Down the line I actually decided to change this frame and get some better wood in there. And for those of you who aren't familiar with woodworking, there are a few types of distinctions when it comes to knots. A knot is formed where a branch grows through the tree, and in wood you can encounter live and dead knots. A live knot is strong and firmly attached to the wood, where a dead knot is weak and often loose and is an invitation for rot to spread through your wood. With my frame cut to shape, I knocked down the corners. This is to prevent any splintering of the wood. I then got the bevel from the old frame and cut it to length. Now the frame was ready to go into the boat.
Alright, so I need to take a little bit off, slightest bit of bevel. Alright, let's try this again.
With the first of the longer frames done, it was time to move on with the rest. 4 to go, before I would need to start tackling some of the more complex tasks.
So on to number 5 here, and this one also has one of these supporting pieces right here. So I'm gonna see if I can get this off without damaging this piece, because this looks pretty much like the freshest piece of wood that is in here. So I'm gonna do my best to reuse that, but it is fastened with 2 rusty old nails. I'm gonna try to use this multi-tool and see if I can kind of get in between here and cut them off. Alright, I got the supporting piece out. Just be able to bang these nails out and put it back into place. Now let's see if we can get this off. Good in the middle, but kind of busted both ends here. So we'll make a new one of those. And remove all the fasteners here, clean it up. so let's see if we can find a suitable piece to make this out of. So let's see if I can get one out of here without hitting this knot up here. Ooh, it is close. So it looks like I can get one frame out of this piece here, which is really unfortunate amount of waste, but because all the knots and the checking on the other side, can't really get much else out of it. Well, nothing I can do about that. Let's prepare this piece and get it milled. I think what I'm gonna do next now is just plane this a couple of times and then put it in the bandsaw and cut it in half. I don't want to do any of these cuts here. If I can actually save a big chunk here that I could maybe get another piece out of. So yeah, let's put it in the bandsaw.
I was taking it slow and steady in the beginning. Even seemingly trivial tasks were complicated when I'd never done them before. Things like sourcing materials like wood and fasteners weren't straightforward. You can't just go to any hardware store and buy any piece of lumber or screw and put it in the boat. Wood had to be the right species, the right tightness of the grain, sawn in the right way and dried correctly, or it could split, rot, break, shrink or swell. Fasteners didn't only have to be the right width and length, but also the right alloy, or they could corrode in a matter of months and suddenly your boat would fall apart. And as if that wasn't enough, different metals react differently depending on the type of wood it's in contact with, like the tannins in the oak accelerating the rusting of iron and in the process staining the wood black, as visible in the boat. Whereas bronze screws form a stable patina and won't deteriorate like iron. It was dawning on me that a good shipwright wasn't just putting pieces of wood together in the shape of a boat, but they were also arborists, metallurgists, physicists and chemists, plumbers and electricians, true polymaths. And like the saying goes, a jack of all trades is a master of none, but oftentimes better than a master of one. Shipwrights were the true jack of all trades. They have to be, or there would be no boat. That meant there was a mountain of information for me to learn. To truly know what I'm doing, I was fighting a beast, and I'd soon be humbled.
Right, let's see if it fits.
The ease of making these first pieces would be replaced by the dread of taking on the fashion pieces along the side of the transom, progressive bevels and complex shapes. This was going to be a lot harder than what I was doing.
Alright, well that seems to be sitting pretty well. Now I'm just going to clean up that supporting piece here and then we'll move on to number 6. Alright, change of mind. There is actually enough scrap wood for me to pretty quickly make a new piece here. So I'm just going to cut this in half and then I should be able to cut a new one out pretty fast. damn perfect. Alright. That nail is really in there.
Just 3 more frames to go before I could move on to the next task. I have to say, it felt really good seeing all that fresh wood going back into the stern. A kind of satisfaction that is hard to find. Something I would feel after a long project animating for weeks or months at end. Traditional animation is a really slow and gruesome job. For each second of movement I would have to draw 12 images. So it would take a long time before you could feel some satisfaction in your work. But here I could see the result immediately. An hour or 2 of work and something had changed for the better. A great point has been made about modern society. How we've largely swapped meaningful labor directly related to our food, shelter and community with meaningless and abstract work. Instead of laboring to build a house, to grow our own food and to take care of a community, most of us work for someone else, doing work that we rarely see the full benefit of outside of a wage that can barely keep up with inflation. Work that slowly drains our souls from our dreams and passions just to make a measly living, to then buy the things we no longer have time to acquire ourselves. I guess for me this boat is supposed to be an escape vehicle from that kind of life. I dream of a life of freedom, of working with my hands, catching my own food and loving my family and neighbors. But for now that life is still just a dream, but a dream worth investing every ounce of my soul to one day achieve.
All of the stern frames are in place. Next, it is ring timber fashion pieces in these back blocks here. But I think that's it for today. I'll see you tomorrow.
I was finally making some serious headway, and it felt incredible seeing all the fresh wood going back into the boat. And with spring bringing some good weather, it was time to finally remove the tarps. For 6 months I'd been living under leaky tarps, no sunlight getting into the boat. It felt like emerging out of hibernation. Living on a boat with no running water, no functioning bathroom and no sunlight isn't the most fun experience I've ever gone through. So I was really excited to finally invite the sun back in. And now I could finally see her in all her glory again.
Yes, now back to work.
Thank you so much for watching this episode, and a extra big thank you to all of you that have become patrons. If you're not already a patron and you want early access to episodes, bonus episodes, merch and a whole lot of other perks, then check out the Patreon. You can either scan the QR code that is up in the left corner right now, or you can click the link in the description. There you can also find a couple of other ways to support this show. Liking, commenting and subscribing is always greatly appreciated, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next episode.